Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another live stream chat on A Voice in the Desert. Before we start, please take notice of the little email address there on the screen at the moment. If you've got questions or comments which you'd like to contribute to the live stream today, please use that address and send them to me. I'll do my best to read them out and share my own thoughts on what you've written. I probably should remind people that what you're hearing now at this very moment is live, but you may come on later and it'll be a recording. Obviously, when it's a recording, you won't be able to get through to me. It'll be history. But at the moment, if you're receiving this live, we appreciate your comments. And we have a fair bit to get through this morning, today. Hopefully, we'll be able to cover it, but otherwise it may run over into another session. As you probably know, we've got a really controversial topic for discussion this week. There's an awful lot that could be said one way or the other on it. So let's all be praying that we may be able to learn from one another. So this doesn't just turn into a fight between one religious point of view and another. And before I start, I want to make a disclaimer. Well, maybe two disclaimers. For one thing, much of what we're likely to say today will not be based directly on things that Jesus taught, even though that's the primary message coming through, I hope, this channel. Jesus is noted for his silence on so many of the concerns that Christians have about quite a few sexual matters. So that may complicate our attempts to locate the truth, possibly in areas where there's not one size that's going to fit everybody. Now, my second disclaimer kind of relates to the first one. It's that I myself am not 100% certain that my position, as expressed in the video that prompted this chat, is a correct one. And of course, that has to apply to things I say today as well. Truth be known, I'm not 100% certain of anything. We always need to be at least a little bit open to new revelation, which may alter or fine-tune our previous understanding. Nevertheless, on the matter of Christians and masturbation, I feel I only have about 70% certainty. Because of that, I kept silent for a long time. It's only because this topic has such a powerful influence on the lives of so many Christians today, and because it seems that condemnation and guilt are stunting the spiritual growth of so many good Christian men, that I finally decided to speak out. Now, this matter of spiritual danger actually affects both sides. Just as I feel I need to speak out, others feel I need to speak out against what I'm saying. For me personally, I don't want to be guilty of having said nothing when something needs to be said. But neither do I want to be guilty of having said the wrong things when I have spoken up. I've received a fair bit of mail this week telling me that the souls of many people will be on my hands if God sends them to hell for masturbating as a result of things that I've said. Maybe, could be true. If masturbation is the great sin that they say it is, then I have done all of you a great disservice. I think there are plenty of people who are sincerely convinced that this is the case, and I'll try to respect that sincerity in the comments I make today. Nevertheless, my own position is that I see lives being destroyed more through unnecessary guilt and through fanatical obsessions with trying to make our bodies do something they were never intended to do than I've seen through people doing something that has never been forbidden anywhere in the Bible anyway. I feel that the campaign against masturbation places a heavy and very unnecessary load on people, a load which even the ones who preach it have not been able to carry. Okay, here's something that someone wrote into me this week, letter number 1. They wrote, masturbation is carnal pleasure rather than spiritual and righteous. I try to overcome it myself, but we must crucify our flesh and bring it into submission to God. We need to keep on crucifying the flesh every day. There are testimonies of people who visited hell because of masturbation. I'm not perfect yet, but I strive to enter the narrow way. You will stand before God and give an account of what you teach, what you do, and what you approve. People can make an excuse to God on Judgment Day because of your video, and God will put their blood on your hands. I would rather be spiritual and take drastic measures to hold myself from sinning, even if it means to cut off my right hand or my right eye. And most of all, don't get aroused and then make excuses for sinning. Okay, so first I want to thank this brother for writing in. His sincerity comes through. I thank him for that concern. But to explain my position in response to the letter, I want to take note of three things. And I think they'll relate to other letters as we get to them. Number one, practicing what we preach. The person challenging me in this letter has hinted throughout the letter that he himself has not stopped masturbating. Now, I grant that there is a difference between doing it and then going on to justify it, which is more or less what I've done. But we still have to ask ourselves why some of the harshest critics of masturbation are people who openly confess they're still doing it. Now, masturbation is a conscious, objective, black or white action. According to the same people who condemn it, you have a choice. You can either do it or you don't. So why do most of them admit that they still choose to do it from time to time? If everyone else is going to hell for doing it, what about them? The answer to this question is important to me because I believe the reason we keep doing it is because God never intended for us not to do it. We're trying to carry a load that God has not put onto us. All that effort is being wasted on following a man-made rule, and it's not available. The effort that we're putting into that is not available for the disciplines that Jesus really did teach. Look at the story of the woman caught in adultery. Remember, adultery is very clearly forbidden in Scripture, unlike masturbation. Yet Jesus says to the Pharisees, "Let him that is without sin cast the first stone." So, which of us can cast the first stone at the masturbators? Point number two. The second thing I know from this letter is that the person who wrote it concludes by saying, most of all, don't get aroused. Now, what I see here is that this war against the flesh, so to speak, is one that's not going to stop with masturbation. It just naturally has to attack wet dreams as well. Well, they also include thoughts of a sexual nature. And this person seems to imply that it's a sin to even become aroused. Now, that's something. Arousal can happen without any thoughts about sex. Scientific tests have shown that men become aroused several times per night, just when they're sleeping. They're not even aware of it. This includes a lot of men who had thought that they were impotent. We're not even aware of it during the night, and yet the most frequent evidence of this is when someone wakes up with an erection and no dream preceding it. So, what are we really dealing with? Seems to be an unnatural hatred for what we are, and all of it without any scriptural support. Now, the third thought is this one about crucifying the flesh. I know it's a valid scriptural phrase. It's used by the Apostle Paul, but there is a lot of disagreement about what it actually means. One brother sent me a link to an hour-long video by a woman who said she could prove that masturbation is a sin. I didn't listen to all of it, but she started by admitting that masturbation is never mentioned in the Bible. She didn't seem to think that mattered at all. It's not even mentioned in the Bible, yet she can provide absolute proof that it's a sin. Well, from that point on, we were expected to think that she had the inside knowledge on what such phrases as crucifying the flesh mean in relation to all of our sexual urges. And this is the usual problem that opponents of masturbation face. They simply cannot support it based on Scripture. Why? Because it's a man-made doctrine. I agree. Paul did say some things that we could use to feel condemned over, well, really almost anything. Whether it's eating something that tastes good, ooh, the flesh, it's carnal. Enjoying the soft breeze on a hot day, or just finding pleasure in a beautiful sunset. It could all be deceptions of our flesh, because they all bring us some kind of physical pleasure. This whole idea of crucifying the flesh has led to things like monks whipping themselves and wearing horsehair shirts so that their skin will almost itch to death constantly. I can't see this as being consistent with the life and teachings of Jesus. So I would like to balance this phrase from Paul with what Jesus said about his yoke being easy and his burden being light, or about us by abiding in him and his word abiding in us, so that we'll be able to know the truth, and the truth will set us free. I cannot help but think that the anti-masturbation position is more in line with where the Pharisees were coming from. It places heavy burdens on the people, impossibly heavy in my opinion, for no good reason, apart from trying to make others feel guilty and maybe trying to make ourselves feel a little bit superior. Okay, let's go into the second letter. The letter says, I masturbated to pornographic material for years, sometimes more than 4 times a day. But on the 10th of March, 2016, it's over a year ago, God cured me. From the next day onward, I could willfully say no more and turn away both from the act and from persistent lustful fantasies. 14 months later, I still not masturbated. I have complete confidence it is a thing of the past. I do have wet dreams from time to time, which puzzle me in regard to their content. Now note the reference to wet dreams. The problem obviously has not been completely resolved. Something I've already mentioned about so many of these people who condemn masturbation. Now I'm going to stop that letter number 2 here for a moment and move on to a third one. I think it's quite a reasonable observation that came from a youth who wrote back and forth with me for a bit as he was sincerely trying to work through the issues. He felt that he could control masturbation, but he could not control the wet dreams. Then he learned that in both cases, what is happening is just that a buildup of seminal fluid is leaving his body. Yeah, it feels good when that happens, but there are no demons or other dramas for him now. Just acceptance of a natural bodily function, like urinating. This is what he wrote. Before I stopped masturbating, I had never experienced a wet dream. When I was told masturbation was a sin, I stopped. But then I started having wet dreams. So I prayed for God to help me stop that as well. Then I found out that it's going to come out one way or the other. I have come to the conclusion that the body is trying to balance itself, so there's no need for feeling guilt, whether it's masturbation or wet dreams. Most people who condemn masturbation do not mention wet dreams, and that's not good enough for me. Any solution that does not kick out the 2 is a failure and not acceptable to me. We should rather focus on not lusting after someone else and not fantasizing about real people. I'm going to go back to letter number 2. Notice the last line from the letter we just read. We should rather focus on not lusting after someone else and not fantasizing about real people. Okay, this is from the youth who was writing. He said he wasn't going to worry about masturbation as long as he could stop lusting after someone. Now we need to take a close look at what that means, because that seems to be where all the trouble stems from. So this previous letter, number 2, said something similar. The brother who opposed masturbation wrote, according to you, lust and masturbation can be separated. Yet I see masturbation as a means to address what lust has produced. Well, I would agree that masturbation deals with an unwanted erection. But is it lust that produces every erection? Jesus spoke out against lust. The religious world has largely redefined it to mean the body's natural sexual urges. This anti-masturbation brother says that lust, according to him, not me, produces sexual arousal. In my opinion, it's a rather huge false assumption, yet it does illustrate where the anti-masturbation is leading and where it comes from, which is a denial of a natural physiological experience, that we were kind of made evil. So what is lust? I wonder how many of us are aware that the word lust doesn't exclusively relate to sex. The Bible talks, for example, about the children of Israel lusting after the leeks that they were able to eat when they lived in Egypt. Now, does that make eating leeks a sin? Does it make hunger a sin? No. The sin was that they were rebelling against God and saying that they would go back to Egypt in a flash if only they could find a way to do it. That's the lust, okay? To disobey God. I said it in the video on Jesus and masturbation, but I'll say it again here. Because it seems that a lot of people have missed it. Lust is wanting something so badly that we would gladly disobey God if we could get it and not be discovered in the process. Now, this is so far removed from saying that lust is what causes a man to have an unwanted erection. Okay, so lust is a desire for something that God has forbidden, a desire which would disobey God if only we could get away with it. But God has not forbidden masturbation. I think most of us would agree he has forbidden sex outside of marriage. I think the Pharisees would have gladly had sex outside of marriage if only they could find a way to get away with it. Whether or not they masturbated, which they almost certainly did, they were guilty of lust. Sadly, much of the world today is also guilty of lust. So it's easy to assume that lust and masturbation are the same thing. Or, as said by the author of letter number 2, it's easy to assume that lust and sexual arousal are the same thing, given that almost every male who gets aroused would be prepared to just have sex to make the erection go away. Isn't that the picture we get of the world today? If the opportunity presents itself, if they can get away with it, they'll do it. That's lust. And here's where pornography comes into it. With pornography, suddenly we do have the opportunity to get away with forbidden sex, because pornography is with real people and it's through a video screen, so you can do it anonymously. Unless your mother or your wife goes snooping into your computer, you can do it without ever getting caught. There's no doubt in my mind that pornography is wrong. It's lustful. It's the same as adultery. Whether or not there's ever any physical contact between you and the person or people on the screen. It's quite likely that almost all evangelical Christians would agree with me that pornography is sinful. So, what's the difference? The special problem facing us today is, like the teenager said in letter number 3, young people are being introduced to pornography even before they've reached puberty. That is, even before they're old enough to have wet dreams. And so they get confused. More and more people think that pornography and masturbation are inseparable, two parts of the same thing. But they're not the same thing. Or should I say, they're not necessarily the same thing. When masturbation is linked with pornography, it is evidence of lust. What makes it lustful? Not that it involves thoughts about sex, but that it comes with disregard for what God has clearly forbidden, which is sex between people who are not married to each other. But masturbation can be separated from pornography. It can be separated from lust as well. That happens when you separate it from a desire to sin against God's laws about married sex. It's all about your motive for masturbating. Sometimes Christian men just wish the erection would go away, and masturbation is the easiest way to do that. I knew a Pentecostal minister once who told me that in his youth, before he became a Christian, he lived a pretty sinful life. However, if he had a date with a Christian girl, he would masturbate just before the date. Why? Because he found it easier to be chaste in his behavior to the girl by doing that. He did it out of respect for her. Can you see how that's masturbation for the express purpose of not breaking God's laws? The brother who wrote letter number 2 against masturbation said, I see masturbation as a means to address what lust produces. The assumption he's making is that becoming sexually aroused is lust, or worse still, becoming sexually aroused comes from something hidden even more deeply inside of the way that each one of us has been made. Arousal, according to this assumption, results from a vague source called lust. Some demon, that is the demon of lust, has caused you to get an erection. This erection does not need to come from looking on a woman or from fantasizing about anything. Just the fact that you got aroused is proof that you have this demon of lust. Erections only happen to people who are controlled by this demon. The obvious conclusion, according to this false assumption, is that virtually everyone, including the people speaking out against masturbation, is guilty of lust. They can never be free from it, not for more than a few hours or perhaps a few days at a time. Now, not everyone says it that clearly, but that's what we're all saying by implication when we begin to attack all masturbation as being lust. What happens inside our bodies, even when we're totally unconscious, because believe me, this could even happen to a person in a coma, is lust, according to this false assumption. You might as well just go out and fornicate because that lust demon is never going to go away, not permanently. Apart from people who've been castrated or otherwise made impotent, there are no men for whom it has gone away altogether. Well, there have been a few brothers who have written in and said that they managed to stop masturbating for extended periods of time, like the one that said he'd not masturbated for 14 months. But I don't think any of them has said that they've ceased having wet dreams, although I could imagine that too, coming with old age. Nor have any of them said that they've ceased having erections. So their battle against their definition of lust still hasn't been won, has it? It's a never-ending battle. Nevertheless, from my position, erections happen. It's a fact of life. I think we need to recognize this in order to escape the condemnation that the devil spreads around through a doctrine that does not come from the Bible. The doctrine that condemns us as surely as a doctrine would if we were being told that it's sinful to defecate or it's sinful for women to have periods. And that'll come up a little bit later on in a letter from someone else. When an erection happens, one can address it through lust. That is, you run out and get as close to the real thing as you can get away with. Or they can address it through our God-given safety valve. That is, masturbation fantasies which do not involve real people. In either case, ejaculation will occur. But God's looking at the motive. Lust will lead you to get as close to actual sex as you can get away with, whereas Christian masturbation will fantasize, but primarily for the purpose of making the erection go away so we can get on with life and with serving God. Now, one final comment from the brother who said that he had not masturbated or even fantasized about sex for over a year. He finished by saying, quote, I regard a married man who fantasizes about his wife as acceptable, end quote. I don't know if this brother himself was married, but I think that married men who claim to have achieved victory over masturbation by just turning to the wives for sex, or by saying that masturbation is okay for them because they can fantasize about the wife instead of some imaginary woman, they really don't count when it comes to working on a solution for single men. Just telling single men to just run out and get married and let their wives deal with every erection that comes along isn't the answer either. Similarly, older men who have lost their sex drive should not be presented as proof that if you spend 50 or 60 years praying, God will eventually take it away. Now, here's another letter that came in this week, which I feel helps to further illustrate the position against masturbation, showing that it does not come from anything that Jesus said. And I think this is fairly important. The doctrine comes from the minds of people who are obsessed with seeing evil in almost everything. Ask yourself, for example, if the argument this writer gives about whether you would masturbate in a church might just as easily be addressed to a married couple, asking them if they would have sex in a church. Just because something is personal and intimate doesn't make it evil. And yet we can use terms like violate and all these evil terms about a simple act of sex. Anyway, this is what this next brother wrote to me this week. He said, wet dreams, from what the Lord has shown me, fall in line with a spiritual attack. Just look up incubi and succubi. Now, I can tell you, if you check any concordance, you're not going to find either of those terms in the Bible. They're medieval legends. Anyway, back to the letter. If, that is, wet dreams, wet dreams, can either be from demons or witches and warlocks who astral travel. Astral travel? Once again, where is that in the Bible? Where are these thoughts coming from? Anyway, back to the letter. When people think about sex with people in dreams, it's a form of witchcraft that conjures up demons from the person who we're thinking about. It's truly wicked in all respects. Please hear me on this, because I battled with masturbation and I had to go through several months of spiritual warfare. Jesus Christ has delivered me from countless demons. How can you love someone truly and then violate them? I wish I could show you what the Lord has shown me, but you must pray and fast for God to truly help you. Okay, once again, we're not being urged to obey Jesus, are we? Instead, we're being urged to fast and pray until we have accepted this man-made doctrine, which glorifies the devil, actually. Back to the letter. Not one person can masturbate and say they don't think about someone made in the image of God, whether the person is real or not. I don't know. A little comment from me here. The sin is not that you've done anything to a real person, not according to this man. The sin is that you've thought about the sex act at all. Anyway, finishing off the letter, he says, ask yourself this question. Can you do such acts in a church or before God? It's very hard to give the glory to the Almighty Father while doing any act where we degrade someone, imaginary or otherwise. Case in point, anime and cartoons. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think that such people are sincerely trying to combat evil, but because they've never actually listened to Jesus or allowed him to make the rules, their doctrines are going to become progressively more and more bizarre. Here's where I want to bring it back to what is the theme of this YouTube channel. The teachings of Jesus. All of the effort and zeal that it takes to keep trying to make ejaculation cease is many, many times more effort than it would take to just obey the real teachings of Jesus. The ones that do not take so much manipulation to make them say what we want them to say. I've so far not found one of those people teaching against masturbation who will show anywhere near the same zeal for teaching people to do things like forsaking all or to stop using titles that Jesus forbids his followers to use. In other words, all the fuss about masturbation does seem to be just one more doctrine of man. It's being used to muffle what Jesus actually did teach. That's the aspect of the teaching which convinces me more than anything else that something's wrong. All right, we have a letter that's come in from Van. He says, comment, I've listened, read, and watched many articles and books or documentaries on sexual immorality and how to avoid it. Most of them sum up to condemnation and or shaming people for even having the urge. For whatever reasons, people think of sex as dirty. an inconvenient necessity. I think that in its correct setting, sex is a wonderful gift from God. Thank you for shedding so much needed light on this difficult and taboo subject. Thank you, Van. And Van goes on to a question. He says, do you believe God allows any type of sexual behavior between two married consenting adults? Where do we draw the line between what's considered immoral in God's eyes? Is there a clear line? I know the topic is masturbation, and this goes a bit out of the main subject, but I'm trying to figure that out. It's a tough one and maybe should be answered in private. I'll leave it up to you. I know it's a tough one. Well, me. This is what I have to say. Any type? That opens a can of worms, man. Anything which involves other people, for example, is still lust. I'll try not to be too specific here, but I think that the word consent also needs to be considered deeply. Sex can become rather routine at times, and so some experimentation probably occurs in just about every marriage. But you need to be sure that there's a genuine concern for the desires and the needs of both parties. Just getting someone to consent, that is to go along with your fantasy, could still be pretty one-sided. I'm not ruling it out, but I think a little bit of give and take is pretty important to keep the marriage moving forward and to deepen the relationship. Okay, and remember, this is what love is about, is a concern for the other person. I guess this relates to the masturbation topic, and that you're still free to masturbate. Okay, if your how can I say it? Your special interests are not helping the relationship, well then no way. Obviously, this is an area where each couple needs to work out things for themselves. I'm definitely not someone who says that it must always be the missionary position, so to speak. But after all of the experimentation is over and done with, it still really does come back to that great need to hug somebody. Hug one another more than anything else. It's pretty hard to beat hugging. Stephen's written in, I listened intently to your talk on Jesus and masturbation. I found it very interesting, logical, persuasive, and convincing. But sadly, I don't agree with it. For me, sexual expression, like any other form of love, has to be inclusive and other-centered, not self-centered and self-indulgent, which masturbation is. Comments for me. Well, the same thought was expressed in another letter where the writer said that he had heard, it said, this is a letter I haven't read out this morning. He said he'd heard that fornication is better than masturbation because at least in fornication, you're loving someone. Okay, if it's all about that, the logic works, doesn't it? But where's that kind of reasoning going? We end up forbidding something that's not forbidden, and we justify something that is forbidden. Masturbation is not about love. It's not about selfishness. Okay. It's just masturbation is what it is. I think it's vitally important that Christians learn to recognize that sex and love are very different things. There's an old song which said love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage. Remember that one? You can't have one without the other. Sounds so romantic, but it's just not true. Okay, and it's led to a lot of confusion in the world where people think, you've got to jump into bed with anyone you love. Those people who received personal invitations to attend today's live stream received with the invitation a very short article about the need for Christians to hug one another. Hugging and loving go together. That's true. We want to love the people we hug. We want to hug the people we love. But hugging and sex? No. Sex is sex. Sure, in a marriage, it can be an expression of love, and it does usually involve hugging. But the sexual aspect in itself is still not love. It's simply a physical need. Biological. God's placed it in each of us, and it pretty much guarantees the survival of our species. That biological need, in men anyway, is there with or without marriage. So masturbation for the purpose of not committing fornication, or for the purpose of not forcing ourselves on our spouses when they're not free to have sex, can in fact be a very clear expression of love. Anyway, I'll read on with Stephen's letter. He says, I think every teaching of Jesus is an invocation to get beyond ourselves and incorporate our fundamental desires, as well as our highest spiritual desires, in a path that leads to others. I myself have fallen to seductions of self-gratification in many forms, not just masturbation. I can say I've buried myself in too much prayer, spiritual books, food, self-justification, spiritual pride, false humility. The list is endless, all under the guise of a supposed natural need to express myself first in order to get back then to the real business of serving our Lord. This is all pride in capital letters. I would say that there are some basic needs that do need to be met in order to enable us to serve the Lord. Sleep and food are two that come to mind. I get your point, Stephen, about us never getting around to serving God if we're constantly pampering ourselves. But I think a lot of men have found that after they've been able to get rid themselves of that raging erection, they really can serve the Lord better and with fewer distractions. Ironically, the worldwide obsession with loving ourselves, which I'm sure bothers me as much as you, was justified decades ago when it first came out on the basis that so much religion has taught us to hate ourselves and to deny ourselves to a fanatical extreme. I personally think both extremes are wrong. I don't think God intended either one. He created us with the ability to experience pleasure. Yes, it can be abused, but it's another form of abuse which causes us to feel condemnation over anything that we enjoy doing. So back to Stephen. He says, as you said, dreams and sleep provide us with a natural form of coping with our sexual desires. And of course, a healthy sexual relationship with our spouse should, for me, be enough. I found masturbation very closely aligned with lust, as the two are for me-centered, and play off each other in the most subtle ways. Trying, as you said, to control one's thoughts and fantasies is difficult, as the devil knows our weaknesses and he can infiltrate and twist things. This has been my experience. It can be much easier to develop discipline if we add prayer to govern our sexual desires. Thank you, Stephen, for writing and for sharing those thoughts. Just to clarify my position, what I said about dreams and sleep is that wet dreams are one way for the body to eject a buildup of seminal fluid in men. What is natural and necessary is for the fluid to get out. But merely being asleep doesn't solve the problem if one is to be consistent with the teaching, which says that dreaming about sex when ejaculation occurs is still lust. We often wake up immediately after ejaculation occurs, and the guilt persists because of the teaching that all sexual pleasure is sin. So my position is that ejaculation is normal. It will occur with some manipulation, called masturbation, or without manipulation, called a wet dream. It's the fantasy that we need to deal with. Is that fantasy necessarily sin in itself? I don't think so. Now, here's an interesting question from a young woman living in a Muslim country. She says, Jesus said that if you look at a woman to desire her, then you've committed adultery. She's turning it around and reverse, the female to the male. What if I like someone, just liking or loving him for his personality? Is that considered adultery? Now, people might be a little bit surprised by my answer, but I think we need to understand that in a Muslim country, we're dealing with some cultural problems that we might not face in some other Western countries. I should also explain that I always question myself when trying to reply to women on such matters, because I don't think everything I say about men can necessarily be applied to women. I think this letter illustrates a bit of that. To men, we might say, well, of course not. There's nothing wrong with just liking someone. On the whole, I agree with that. But, of course, all sexual relationships start somewhere, and they can easily start out looking quite innocent. Women in particular are usually more emotional than physical in their understanding of relationships. So these emotional attractions can easily lead to problems, especially if they're misinterpreted by the men. This is where I'm referring to the culture. So, sister, I would say that it's not lust just to like someone, but especially in a country where there's very little interaction between the males and the females anyway, even very subtle hints can turn into problems rather quickly. The whole subject of flirting comes up. A little bit too much foolishness, a bit of showing off, a smile here and there. And before you know it, you've given the wrong impression to the man, and your own defenses may be down. So it helps to be in an environment where there are clear understandings about what the limits are in mixed sex relationships. If you can't do that, then it's probably safer to develop friendships with other females in the situation you're in now. And while we're at it, here's another email from a female. She writes, "Thank you for shedding light on this topic that keeps getting swept under the rug. I've been searching for the answer to this in the Bible for years. I've always had regret, shame, and guilt from listening to other Bible teachings saying that masturbation is wrong, even though I have natural, non-influenced sexual urges. I've tried for years unsuccessfully to let those natural urges pass. Because of this, I never felt free. I've always fallen farther away from Jesus. I kept thinking, what a disappointment I must be. And when it's my time to face Jesus, he'll condemn me to hell because I've been breaking my promise after asking Jesus to forgive me many times over. It makes me sad because I want so badly to be closer to Jesus, and I keep thinking about my future husband too. How it would be unfair of me not to have a map on what to do so we can successfully help each other out. I need all the correct biblical advice I can get." Well, as I said a moment ago, I'm not confident when it comes to advising women. It does seem there are many more women than men who can control their urges to masturbate, largely because they don't have the buildup of fluid that men have. I sometimes think of the hardline teaching against men even having wet dreams, which often comes from women, by the way, as being akin to telling a woman that if she's spiritual enough, she can will herself to stop having periods, since that's nature's way of expelling her reproductive seeds. Nevertheless, the whole idea of enjoying sex is there for women as well as men, even if the need is not as strong for most of them. So thank you, sister, for writing. I hope that what has been said here will be of some encouragement to get stuck into the things that Jesus really did teach. I think the same goes for all of us. If only we were so zealous about promoting stuff that Jesus undeniably taught. Now, here's another one from a youth. He said, "You say masturbation is not a sin from your video, right? Well, doesn't the semen have life in it like a child? And when it's spilled and not into the woman, doesn't the child die? Didn't God say, repopulate the earth? This seems to limit what goes on between a wife and husband. Am I right or wrong?" Now, a lot of people are bashful about discussing sex, especially with young people. I know it can be overdone, but if we do not create an atmosphere where young people can ask questions like this one without fear of embarrassment, a lot of misunderstandings can be cleared up. So let me tell you, brother, first about sperm cells being little unborn children. In fact, almost all of those sperm cells are going to die one way or another anyway, whether you masturbate or not. They're not little unborn children because they cannot even start to grow into something bigger than one cell, unless they join with another much larger cell in the body of a woman, which we call the egg or the ovum. Even then, there are thousands of sperm cells released each time a male has a climax. Yet only one of them at best will ever grow into a child. Then only if the female cell is available, which only happens at one special time each month. The second part of the question is another fairly widespread belief. That is that even sex between married couples is evil or selfish if it's not for the express purpose of making babies. In fact, God's instructions for Adam and Eve to populate the earth has changed considerably over the years. Most of the patriarchs in the Old Testament, Abraham, Isaac, David, those guys, had more than one wife. That way, they could have hundreds of children. But in the New Testament, the shift was away from polygamy, even to the point of having no wife. Church leaders were not allowed to have more than one wife, and they were even told that it would be better if they had none. But married sex continues, and mostly it's just a gift from God that two people can share in a lifetime relationship. which I believe goes a long way towards keeping a couple together when other stresses threaten the marriage. There's nothing at all in the Bible against a married couple being able to enjoy sex, whether or not they ever have children from such sexual activity. Okay, I received another email about this subject from a guy called Jack. He sent copies to over 200 people. He included a link to the video on masturbation. Thank you for that, Jack. And he said in huge letters, at this YouTube site, there is a video about sexual sin in which masturbation that does not imagine a forbidden partner is just fine and okay. I disagree, and here is why. Please take the time to read all of these Bible verses out loud. A lot of emphasis in big print. The letter was way too long to read out here, but it included long quotes from the 15th chapter of Leviticus, where the Bible says that if a man spills his seed, the seed is unclean, and so he should wash himself and his clothing, bedding, etc. It also says that a woman who is having a period is unclean. Then Jack pasted the text of several sermons that have been preached on these passages from Leviticus. I read quite a few of them. I think maybe only gave up at the last one. But basically they were all saying that even though males and females have not consciously sinned by having a wet dream or by having a period, this health rule was there in the Old Testament about cleaning up after yourself is God's way of saying that we are fundamentally evil and that a sacrifice needs to be made for our fallen state. I don't think any of the sermons actually even addressed masturbation, nor did the passage mention masturbation. It was all about the need to clean up spilled seed and menstrual flow. I don't want to get into an argument over something written in Leviticus, as there's a whole lot in Leviticus that I don't understand. However, the bottom line, in my opinion, is just that Jack's approach doesn't provide a solution. Well, at least no way to stop having wet dreams or stop having periods. The idea of saying, okay, well, God, just forgive me for being, sinful in my nature, that's fair enough. But I don't think any of the preachers that he quoted on the subject even suggested that it's possible to stop these things from happening. So the end result just seems to be a theological statement about our fallen nature, for whatever that's worth. I want to commend Jack for providing some scriptures, okay, and some sermons, but that's about as far as it went. No real answers. So I don't know how else to respond to what you had to say, Jack. I'll just leave it there. Okay, I have another letter from another sister in a Muslim country. I might pass over that for now and answer that one privately, because I think a few have come in. Is that right? Can't find any. Oh, yeah, here they are. Okay, here's a comment from Philip. One of the things that most concerned me with the debate on masturbation is that often those who condemn it the loudest, on the basis that people will go to hell for continuing to masturbate, are mostly people who do not feel obliged to obey the things that Jesus clearly taught. So we end up with a situation where people are coming down very hard on others for breaking a rule that doesn't appear in the Bible, at the same time that they excuse themselves from obeying the things that Jesus did teach on other subjects. For example, forsaking their material wealth, turning the other cheek, not praying publicly. It seems to me a clear case of people straining at gnats and swallowing camels. So true. You could say that over and over, I think. This one's from Jerry. I personally have committed the sin of corrupting masturbation with pornography. In doing so, I've found that my ability to masturbate normally has disappeared. Every time I'm aroused, I watch it and I ask God for forgiveness and I commit it again. How can I break this cycle of sin? I guess, Jerry, by turning it off. I have found, that you can't turn off, the need to ejaculate, but you can turn off the screen, the pornography. If you're not aroused enough to masturbate without pornography, then you probably don't have a problem. See, pornography is a simple choice, okay? And I know of many men, many, who just don't watch it, okay? Because we can't stop masturbating doesn't mean we can't stop watching pornography. Okay. This is from Paul. He says, ejaculation reduces the risk of testicular cancer, especially as one grows older. Medical research from Cambridge University stated that some years ago. It's true, and there have been little groups, people who, some little sects of people that say they've managed to stop ejaculation, and a high incidence of testicular cancer for those who kept the seminal fluid inside the body until it, broke down and the body just stopped producing it. It's not a good thing. This is from Kyle. Someone just wrote in saying that any sex involving oneself is self-indulgent. Where does this reasoning end? Is eating a sandwich and enjoying it self-indulgent? To equate pleasure of any kind with sin when it is enjoyed by oneself, which is where this thought process leads to, places an incredibly heavy burden on people. So true. Okay, this comes from Stephen. Might have been the same Stephen that I was quoting earlier, I'm not sure. I says, I must say, this is the first message of yours that I disagree with. To be specific, masturbation. When someone does this, they have to have a visual thought about someone to get aroused and excited. Who can do this without sinful thoughts? Okay, let's start right there, Stephen. So you say sinful thoughts. You get yourself into a kind of a cycle that says, well, I say this is sinful, so who can do it without being sinful? The whole question up for debate here is it a sinful thought? Okay. Very few married men will masturbate and think about their wife. Stephen, how do you know this? Where did you get this from? I guess what you're assuming is that a married man, if he masturbates, is thinking about the woman next door. Okay, I think this is an assumption you're making. He goes on, if the person is not married, who would they think about? So I'm just wondering, Stephen, are you married? to know about these sort of things? You don't, and this is the point we tried to make in the video that was produced, is that you don't think about, the lady next door, or the woman you work with. You're just thinking about a faceless person. You're thinking about sex is what you're thinking about, okay? What if somebody reads a story and the story is erotic? It's not a real person, it's a story. People are quite capable of imagining sex without lusting after a particular woman. Stephen says, this is an immoral act because it plants the seed of immorality. And once it is planted, the tree will grow and produce fruit if it's not cut down. Okay, again, we're in this cycle again. And I say it's immoral, therefore it's immoral. And because it's immoral, I say that it creates immorality. We're not really discussing when you're thinking like that. Stephen says, you highlighted the word look at a woman. So I'll close my eyes and I'm actually having sex with a woman I never met, and I please myself with that thought. Then it is not a sin. Let's call it what it is, sin. Okay. Stephen, where can we go with this, You're calling it sin. The Bible doesn't. Okay? And I think that's, often what it comes down to is, well, I say it's sin, so therefore it's sin. He finishes up, Jesus never spoke about many subjects, but that does not mean we can have our own ways with it. If so, then homosexuality would be right. You do know that they use this as an excuse to live this lifestyle. Is there anything in the Bible against homosexuality, Stephen? Answer that question and then answer the other question. Is there anything in the Bible against masturbation? I think it's as simple as that. Is there anything in the Bible against eating ice cream? We can't just go around and say, I say it's sin, therefore it's sin. Jesus forgot, or the Bible forgot. Okay. Another comment from Philip. On the topic of arousal being lust, it reminds me of an episode of The Simpsons where Ned Flanders calls Reverend Joy to ask for help and to confess that he's lusting after his own wife. I feel this is the approach we have been taught by the religious system. We end up being condemned even for thoughts of sex, any thought of sex whatsoever. Okay, a little bit of humor there. I'm some trouble opening these. Okay, this one comes from John, and the type is so small I can't read it. There we go. Great topic. Okay, so I want to believe masturbation is not a sin. However, the Old Testament teaches about people spilling seed being considered unclean. I thought Christians are supposed to be clean to represent Christ. Masturbation or wet dreams, how are we supposed to address cleanliness? Thanks for your time. John, my own personal opinion is that when the Bible's talking about clean and unclean, it's not necessarily talking about moral or immoral. And I get this from things that Jesus said. You know, certain foods are considered unclean. And yet Jesus says it's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you. So we're moving from unclean to immoral. So obviously, if someone spills their seed, that means they had a wet dream. That's what we're not talking masturbation. You know, doesn't have to be masturbation. They spill their seed. The seed comes out. Clean up the mess. That's all it's saying, as far as I can see. Clean up the mess. It's unclean to leave it lying around. Okay, what was it said? How are we supposed to address cleanliness? Yeah, I think probably that's my answer. Okay, this is from Brendan. He said, what fruit does masturbation bear? And then says, this issue seems to be more personal than a matter of doctrine. Yeah, that is something, Brendan, that I wrestled with for a long time before I came out with the video. That I think, you know, there's some truth in that. At the same time, I think it's also, it can be an escape from having to deal with something that needs to be dealt with. I think sometimes we say it's personal because we don't want to face the criticism and the condemnation that will come if you say what you think is the truth. Now, I think that's true on both sides. You know, if a person actually thinks something is evil, well, then, you know, you don't say, well, this is personal. We don't talk about it, because somehow or other, those who are against masturbation may not be putting up billboards, but they've got their message out, you know, whispering in the ear here and whispering in the ear there, telling people this is bad, this is bad. And yet, all I'm saying is it's not in the Bible, you know, it's a man-made doctrine. So, you know, I'm not sure what you mean by saying it's not a matter of doctrine, because the doctrine just means teaching, and people are teaching that it's wrong. And I'm trying to teach that the Bible does not condemn it, per se. The question is, what fruit does masturbation bear? I think it's a question that could go in either direction. And I hope that's gotten across here, is that I've said a number of times that a person, and probably most people who masturbate, are lusting. Not because they're masturbating, okay, but because they're trying to find a way to have sex if they can get away with it. Which is why, you know, it's so much clearer, that distinction today. They simply turn on pornography, don't they? Okay, and then that leads to, you know, dating and sex texting and all these other things. Gets closer and closer to the real thing. That's the fruit of lust, okay? It's not the fruit of masturbation, okay? Plenty of Christians who simply masturbate so they can be over and done with it and get back to work. No, we got. Okay, there's one more. This is Stephen again. He said, you said that you felt 70% correct about this subject, but your response by rejecting everyone else's thoughts who disagree with you looks as if you're 100% sure about your opinion. I guess the thing here, Stephen, is that, how do we put this? I say, you know, I 70%, I can't think of a good illustration, you know, 100% of that 70% is in, you know, in favor of my position. You know, I can't sort of say, okay, I'm going to agree with 30% of what you say. What I'm agreeing with, you know, in my questioning is your right to say it and your sincerity in saying it. But I'm still going to disagree with you. I mean, that's the conclusion that I've reached. I have to act on the 70% that I have. Now, I guess what you'll say is that you're 100%, so you don't have to practice some kind of, okay, I'll agree with you sometimes and disagree with you other times. So that's my 70%. No, I think maybe that's about all the mail we've received. Okay, so that might be a good time to finish it up, unless I've missed something here. Okay, I'm just looking. Oh, here we go. Yeah, there was one. Okay, hidden down there at the bottom. Okay, it says, my name is Rocky. I'm 28. I'm married almost 5 years. I do not live with my wife due to being out of prison 1 year and sober 2 years. Kind of getting on my feet again, for say. With this topic of masturbation, it's been one of my biggest struggles. Watching your video on this has given me a lot of relief. I have a video of my wife that does just fine for me from time to time. Not every time. I do not get to see her every week, mostly just every other week. I've been really good about not watching porn. Now that I've watched your video, I have peace that I have overcome the lustful immorality. This is a terrific letter. I mean, it's such a good illustration of what I'm trying to say. A peace that I've overcome the lustful immorality of sexual sensation. I think about my wife when I must masturbate. Please read this comment in your live stream. It's just about getting past that pole that tries to overcome you and to keep you from moving on in life through masturbation. I look the other way when I see women 9 times out of 10. Your video was spot on. Let's not fool ourselves. Amen, and keep up the good work, brother. Okay, that's a great letter to finish on. Okay, can people see that? Here's a married man, okay, not able to be with his wife. But, you know, what we say, he's lusting after his wife. That's what he wants, you know, and he's got a right to. He's married, okay? And he's saying he doesn't want porn. He can tell the difference, you see, between the pornography and the lust that's associated with it, and a desire to be faithful to his wife. As I said earlier, that's not necessarily the solution for single men, but the single men don't have to put a face on it. I mean, this guy is able to put that face on it and probably keep the relationship alive between him and his wife despite circumstances. And with that, we'll finish up. It might take a little while to close the screen down here, but I want to thank you all for coming and look forward to seeing you back here again next week. God bless you.